Hi there and welcome to TechPlover. I've had the iPhone 6 as my daily driver for around 3 years now. Yeah, I'm just an ordinary consumer like you, but now I've got the iPhone 10 and just for curiosity I want to compare the cameras between these phones and see how much Apple has improved the cameras through the years. During this comparison, both phones had their cameras at their default settings, except when explicitly explained in the video. Let's do a TechPlover Style Camera Comparison between these phones. Let's start with a mountain view. At first we have HDR off on both phones. The iPhone 6 is doing well on the clouds and the mountains, but the trees at the bottom have less detail and are too dark compared to the iPhone 10. The iPhone 10 on the other hand is doing similarly well on the clouds and the mountains, maybe a little bit more detail than the iPhone 6, but the trees at the bottom are much brighter and have much more detail than the iPhone 6. When turning HDR on, iPhone 6 produces similar photo with concern to the sky and the mountains as the previous photo, but the lower part has dramatically improved in regards to brightness but is still lacking detail. And on the iPhone 10 it's the same, the sky and mountain are similar as on the previous photo, but the trees now have much more contrast and the brightness is more even throughout the photo. When we set the HDR to auto, the iPhone 6 produces similar photo as when the HDR was off. And the same is the case with the iPhone 10 photo. It seems like both the iPhones opted to not use HDR, even though this situation is a perfect HDR one in my opinion. Now let's take a look at some different focus shots. If we start with a near focus, we get a similar blur in the background, but if you look at the iron pole on the iPhone 10 photo, you can see much more detail there than on the iPhone 6 photo. But otherwise, the photos are quite similar. If we check out the far focus, the iron pole is now blurred, and here we can see that the iPhone 10 blurs the iron pole more than the iPhone 6, and the background is brighter and has more detail in the iPhone 10 photo. Let's take one more focus example. Let's try to get this bokeh effect. In this picture, the iPhone 10 kills the iPhone 6. I had a real difficulty getting the focus right on the iPhone 6, but look at the detail and sharpness of the iPhone 10 photo. Simply stunning. We get the background blur in both images, but the iPhone 6 isn't sure what should be blurred and what not. Both the iPhone 6 and iPhone 10 offer panorama shot, so let's compare them. Both iPhones are doing a good job here in this panorama shot. They both handle the clouds and the mountains quite well, but the iPhone 10 produces a better overall brightness and contrast in the bottom part of the photo. Let's check out some low-light photos. If you're using the flash on both the phones, both iPhones are doing quite well, but the iPhone 10 takes the cake with sharpness and better leveled brightness. If there is no flash, there is no doubt here that the iPhone 10 wins in the low-light shot. The iPhone 10 shot is less grainy, has more detail and brightness. Well done Apple, improving the low-light photography. So we looked at photos taken with the main camera on both phones. How about the front-facing camera? Let's take a selfie without HDR, but since the iPhone 6 doesn't have HDR, we can't turn it off. So if we compare these photos, even though the iPhone 6 does not have HDR with its front-facing camera, it seems to handle the cloudy skies pretty well. The iPhone 10 surely has a brighter and more detailed photo, but with the HDR off, it totally washes out the clouds. So in this case, the iPhone 6 takes the better photo here. But when setting the HDR on, we clearly see the difference in the iPhone 10 photo. The clouds can now be seen in the background, and we have more contrast in my face and the beanie. The iPhone 6 photo is of course very similar with the previous one, since no settings have been changed there, because it doesn't have HDR. But how about low-light photography with the front-facing cameras? Improvements have obviously been made to the low-light photography of the iPhone 10 front-facing camera. Even though the photo isn't good, it's much less grainy and shows much more detail than the iPhone 6 photo. Since there is no flash for the front camera, the iPhone 10 flashes a white image on the screen to provide some light for selfie shots, and it obviously makes a difference in a brighter and more detailed photo. But it doesn't make the photo good though. The iPhone 6 does not have this feature, so it's still very grainy in comparison. Now let's compare the video between these phones. Here we have both phones set to 1080p 30 frames per second. The iPhone 10 provides much brighter video and therefore more detail can be seen. But at times the iPhone 6 is handling the sky and clouds better. The iPhone 10 tends to make it too bright. But since the iPhone 10 has optical stabilization, we get much more stable video than from the digitally stabilized iPhone 6 video. The iPhone X seems to have a little bit wider lens than the iPhone 6, getting more into each frame. So let's go to 1080p 60 frames per second. We get a similar result here as we got for the 30 frames per second shot, except of course the higher frame rate. The iPhone X has a brighter shot but struggles with the clouds in the sky as before, and the stabilization seems to work similarly as for the 30 frames per second. Now let's take a look at slow motion. iPhones have become quite famous for its slow motion feature. Both iPhones can shoot slow motion in 240 frames per second, but the iPhone X can shoot in 1080p, while the iPhone 6 only shoots in 720p. And as you can see, the difference between those is quite obvious. You can see much more detail and less grainy video from the iPhone X. But the smoothness in movement is very similar in both videos. We have looked at the video quality, but how is the audio quality? First, let's listen to the audio quality in the built-in microphones of the phones. This is an audio test between iPhone 6 and iPhone X. Let's see how the audio is. We are recording in 1080p, 30 frames per second on both devices. And it's a beautiful day here in TechPlover, Iceland. It's quite cold though. And here on the field we have some horses, some Icelandic horses. And we'll see how the audio has improved in the iPhone X compared to the iPhone 6. The iPhone 6 audio is louder, but picks up more of the wind noise. But even though the iPhone X audio has a lower volume, it seems to do better in noise cancellation. So now we have an audio test using the AirPods included in the box with each phone. And we'll see if there are some improvements in audio quality between the built-in mics, and also if there's any quality difference between the different AirPods. The iPhone 6 AirPods connect to the headphone jack, but the iPhone X connect to the lightning port. And comparing the audio between those two AirPods, there seems to be almost no difference in audio quality. Both phones did not fare well in low light with photos, but how is the low light performance in video? As with the photos, both iPhones produce very grainy video in low light situations, but the iPhone X video is brighter and shows more accurate colors than the iPhone 6 one. The same difference can be seen when allowing a little bit more light into the room. But let's try turning the flash on. The iPhones are using their own flash in these shots, so I couldn't take them side by side. In this situation, both iPhones are doing a great job with color reproduction, but the iPhone X manages to produce brighter and more detailed shots. So we looked at the video from the main cameras on these phones. How about the front-facing camera? In this selfie video, we get a little bit wider shot from the iPhone X and much more detail in the photo. The front-facing camera on the iPhone 6 handles the sky and clouds better than the iPhone X, which is the same I experienced with the main camera. But I cannot see any noticeable difference in the stabilization between the two phones. Looking at a low-light video with the front-facing camera, I'm a little bit disappointed with the iPhone X here. There's not that much difference between the shots. Both shots are very grainy, and I feel like the iPhone 6 is more color correct here, but the iPhone X does a slightly better job when you have a brighter background, such as daylight from a window. But both phones produce quite bad results in low light with their front-facing cameras. So what is the conclusion of this comparison? Of course the iPhone X has a better sensor in its camera, and it has a wider lens. So in most cases the iPhone X produces better photos than the iPhone 6. But if you think about it, the iPhone 6 is 3 years old. Shouldn't there be much more difference in the camera quality between these phones? In some cases, the iPhone 6 seems to fare better than the iPhone X in good lighting situations. And for the front-facing camera, there haven't been much improvements there, especially in low-light video. So this was my camera comparison between the iPhone 6 and the iPhone X. I really enjoyed making this video, and I was quite surprised by the result. I really hope you liked this video. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. See you in my next video.